My guest this week is Ted Dabrowski. He is the president of Wirepoints, an independent nonprofit company delivering original research and commentary about Illinois' economy and government. And that's what I brought him on to do, to talk about all things Chicago and Illinois economy problems, to discuss how bad they are and what we need to do to correct them. Here's the first segment of our interview. Ted, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Charles. Great to see you and talk to you.
Yeah, I said earlier that I had to rectify this wrong. I can't believe that I haven't had you on the show before. So no wonder I couldn't solve any problems. Wirepoints hasn't been here. So now we can get into the nitty gritty. I moved to New York recently, but I'm on in Chicago. I still follow Chicago politics and talk to everybody every day in Chicago. And the country's facing a lot of really big problems, but some of those problems are really either unique in Chicago and Illinois or they're worse. So I wanted to get you on to talk about some of that stuff and then see where we can kind of point out what can be done. So let's start there. What do you think how about this? What was the biggest problem that Illinois or Chicago was facing before COVID? And has it changed? Would you change the ranking of the priorities of the problems after COVID?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to think about it as I answer. The big problem for me is that Illinois and Chicago, we're just outliers and extreme outliers on so many things. It's not like we have a couple problems here, but we're good at some things. There's very, very few things we're good at, and maybe sometimes we're good at sports, right? Whether it's the Cubs or the Blackhawks. But it's frustrating because when you look at things like too much debt, well, we're the number one in the country. Property taxes, well, we're number two after New Jersey. Out-migration and losing our people, we're number two to New York when you look at it on a percentage of population basis. We're losing our people. Corruption, we rank right up there with the best of them. And then you look at things like crime and Chicago crime. Well, you can't compare right now when you compare to the big cities, Los Angeles and New York. We're 5 and 6 and 10 times higher murder rates on a per capita basis. So we're extreme, and you can't help but think that it's a bunch of failed policies. Get to the 30,000 feet and you start to see it's just a cultural problem. It's a political problem. We've got politicians that have just done horrible things to our state for 30, 40 years. And we've just ended with the indictment of Mike Madigan. So that might be the cherry on top. But it's like that. And so, most people are so frustrated, they just leave because they can look at other places. They look at Tennessee and Florida and Texas, and they're booming. They're booming in population, booming in business, booming in growth, and even Indiana is picking up tons of people from Illinois. So it's bad, Charles, and there doesn't seem to be anybody who wants to solve it. There's no plan to solve it, and we've got an election year, so let's see if some of these new candidates pop up. Both the candidates in Chicago and candidates for governor, and see if there's a new plan. And it's got to be radical. It's got to be different. Otherwise, we're just doing the same or a little bit more different, or, marginal stuff. Marginal stuff, incremental stuff won't fix anything.
I want to start with the why. I know some of it is legislation, obviously, but those legislators had to have a reason to do it. Maybe they truly believed it. They had to have a reason to keep doing it. Right? Because they had to be pretty certain. People want to get reelected. So they had to be pretty certain that if I make these policies, no one's going to vote me out. So either I have enough money or I assume that people agree with me. So one of the things that stuck out, I'm from Indiana, and I have a brother who currently lives in suburban Atlanta. And he just refied his home, and he was talking about, man, taxes are going up out here, man. So he told me how much his taxes were. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? That's nothing. In Chicago, for a house twice that value, the taxes would be about 4.5 times that amount. So why does Chicago feel that the only way they can get revenue is to overtax the citizens? How do we even get to this 2.5% tax rate?
Well, the only thing I can say, and I've tried to ask people why they think Illinois is so special, because we really are. Every state's special. They've all got their own stuff, right? But Illinois is just really good at doing what it does to extract more and more money from people. And so, is it, it's almost like there's so much of the population, that probably the highest percentage of population that somehow got their hand in the cookie jar. We've got the most units of government. And that says a lot, because that means a lot of people, a lot of families, a lot of, if you're working in the government, well, you've got a wife or kids, so you got too many people that are tied to the public sector. And you've got the corporations who, you think about all the big corporations, and you talk about Mike Madigan and giving big breaks, real estate breaks to companies. You start to think about how they've got some kind of reasons not to take on the system. You got the media that never takes on the system. It seems like everybody's got their hand in the cookie jar, and nobody wants to upset the apple cart until it goes broke. And so nobody fights back. Our corporate elite. I mean, you're seeing Ken Griffin stand up. He's the first guy to stand up in a while, and of course Rauner did too. But it can't be a couple of billionaires who stand up in Illinois. It's got to be the whole damn system. It's got to be the whole all the corporate guys who benefit from a great state and big population and all that, but they don't stand up, and the media doesn't stand up. They don't want to be called carnival barkers by the governor, for example, and so nobody stands up, and we keep doing the same thing, and the pot gets bigger. The public sector pension contracts get bigger and bigger. The governments, the school districts, their bureaucracies grow, and so nobody wants to end the gravy train, and that's the problem. And maybe it only breaks into when it goes broke, which, God knows how that happens and when it happens, but that's the path we're on. I mean, after all, we were almost junk rated before COVID. So you asked me what changed with COVID. Mm-hmm. Well, all those billions and billions of dollars, we got almost $200 billion from the federal government in Illinois across the private sector, the public sector. All that has turned into massive tax income for the state. Sales tax revenues are up, income tax revenues are up, capital gains from the stock market are up. So Illinois and Chicago, they've got this temporary reprieve of big budgets for a couple of years. Things are going to get bad again, but what we learned in that time is that we don't have that much freedom in Illinois, and we saw that with the power of the teachers unions to keep kids out of school. I'd say that's the biggest thing, is that people learned that people don't have power in Illinois. It's the government that has all the power and the unions that have all the power. And so that might be the thing to watch out for in elections coming up, because maybe some people got sick of it.
Wow. Yeah, but I don't know. It's hard to tell, really. I think you make the most important point by saying that there's the hand in the cookie jar thing, because it sounds like corruption, like, that kind of thing. That's what people think of that saying. But really what you're saying is there's a large percentage of people who benefit from the government being bigger. So, obviously you can have somebody who's like, I don't think the government should be that big. I don't necessarily, in theory, agree with it. However, it is the reason that I'm getting paid what I'm getting paid. It's the reason that I have the benefits I have. It's the reason that I have the pension I'm going to be able to retire. So it's nearly impossible for me to vote against myself. People talk about voting for and against their best interest. This is a very clear line, one-to-one financial benefit that they're going to get. So of course they're going to vote in a way, or stay silent against things they don't believe, because it would just be too difficult financially for them to say otherwise. Right? I mean,
yeah, you've nailed it. That's precisely the problem in Illinois. And, one of the things we're seeing right now with all that COVID money, and this is Governor Pritzker, but I'm sure it's happening all over the country with all this COVID money, is, he's handing out grants to all kinds of groups. Every few days, it's $50 million for this group, $30 million for that group, $20 million for that group, and ignore the politics of it, because there's a lot of political implications of that. Just think about, there's so many people that now have an interest in what the government is doing. They're funding and this could all be benevolent, right? It could be a group that has a true interest in helping some group. They're getting $3 million or whatever the number is from the government. Yeah, they don't want to upset that, because their livelihood now and the livelihoods of people are somehow benefiting from that. And you start looking at To go further, you look at the teacher pension contracts, for example, or sick leave days that they get. You start looking at all these little benefits, and they add up like crazy across the state. It's just too many people that have their livelihoods tied to it, and they, like you said, can't vote against it.
Coming up, more with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Ted Dabrowski. He is the president of Wirepoints and spends most of his time digging into the numbers and paying attention to the issues of the economy and what is affecting Illinois and Chicago. And here we spend the segment talking about the largest problem looming over the state, and that is the crisis of public sector pensions.
If you go back to the 70s or something like that, teachers and other workers were public servants. They weren't paid that well. The benefits probably weren't that good, but at least they got a pension. And what that meant is that teachers and the public school districts would put some money aside into a pension fund. And when a teacher retired, they could retire relatively early in their late 50s. And, they would have some pension to get them through, after doing public sector work, right? And people used to be okay with that because, it wasn't like a great gig to be a teacher. Well, especially in Illinois over time, these unions started gaining more and more power. And, just let's add the Mike Madigan machine. The machine got more and more powerful. You got the dailies, et cetera. And next thing you know, these unions are able to organize and extract more and more benefits. So the pension benefits got a little higher. So for every year you work, you're going to get more when you retire. You start getting things like being able to use your unused sick leave. You could accumulate it throughout your career. So pensions started to go up. And so next thing you know, you have these salaries which start to get inflated, these add-ons to the pensions that start to grow, and the calculation for the pension benefits grew. You get this cost of living adjustment when you're retired that would grow by 1% on a simple basis, not to get mathematical. Now it's 3% compounded. And next thing you know, these pensions are huge. So you got people retiring in their late 50s with $70,000, $80,000 pensions that grow at 3% a year. And so suddenly their power got huge, and what they would lose if they ever give up their power is huge. So they're not going to let go. And this is why the CTU is so, what's the right word, militant. Look how powerful they are, very successful. And I don't mean that in a positive way. I mean that in a pure power way. And so now they have the power to call strikes whenever they want. They get to negotiate whatever they want. Illinois is the only state among our neighbors that lets its teachers union strike. Only 13 states in the country do. And the CTU knows how to extract every single penny, every single time. And people like Lori Lightfoot and Rahm Emanuel, they kind of see they don't have the power. And certainly the people who have the least amount of power are the ordinary parents, because they get jerked around depending on what the administration and the unions do. The kids are last. And that's just the way it is.
You talked about the age. Now, there used to be, I haven't heard it in a while, but, presidential elections 8, 10, 12 years ago, you used to hear them talking about maybe we should raise age Social Security because this, that, and the other. No one's paying attention to the fact that they get to retire basically a decade earlier, but people are living much longer than they used to. So even if you think it's okay for people to make a decent living to retire, you were talking about retiring in Social Security at 65, a lot of the public sector jobs at 55, having a good 10, 15-year run, and, we're done with you. And now people are living to be 80, 90, and a lot of these people, so you didn't expect to pay that money that long, whatever your intentions were. And when they're retiring at 55, a lot of them, they retire as soon as they can, and then they go get another job. So then, and sometimes they get another public sector job. And if they work for 10, 15 years, they get a little small pension there. So they got they're double dipping, all this other things. So I never thought that the public employees should be treated worse than the general public. But common sense says they shouldn't be treated better. And this, in a sense, is treating them better, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is what's happened now is that you've got public sector employees now, they get guaranteed pensions. They have guaranteed contracts, right? Every time there's a new contract, it's a 3 to 4 to 5 year contract. The Palatine School District, they signed a 10-year teacher's contract. I mean, think about that. How many people in the private sector, how many of them have guaranteed contracts? None. How many of them have guaranteed constitutionally protected pensions, retirement funds? None. So what we've done is we've created a class of people who are special. They get guaranteed constitutionally protected pensions for life, no matter what happens, no matter how much the markets go down, no matter how bad the economy is, they get guaranteed pensions that will guarantee to grow at 3% each year over time. The ordinary person doesn't have that. Not only do they not have that, no matter how bad their ordinary life is, they've got to still keep paying taxes to fund those pensions to make sure that they're guaranteed. So you've created two classes of people. One is a special protected class, and then the other one is the one that's got to pay for all that stuff. And that is just unfair in any way you can think of it.
And what about the salaries? You said at the beginning in the 70s that the salaries were paltry. I'm not saying they're all rich, but people will be shocked by what some of these teacher salaries are, right?
Now, what's interesting is that, Chicago probably is, interesting enough. Their salaries don't go crazy. So I'm out in the North Shore, right? I'm in the New Trier area.
Right.
So Chicago, when a teacher finishes teaching in Chicago, they'll have $100,000 something salary, and they'll start with a $70,000 pension. But they get to finish early, and remember 9 months of work here, right? We're not talking a full year work. And, because of the 3% compounded COLA, in 10 years, you'll end up, you're going to be making more than when you retired. Anyway, that's the math of it.
But now in other areas, what are they making?
Oh, but yeah, you come up to New Trier and you're starting to talk about average salaries of average of 125, something like that. And you're talking about other people who make a good bit of money. And then you start jumping up into the administration. Now you're starting to talk 200, 300, 400. And the 400 is not even just in places like New Trier. It happens in places like Calumet City, right? That's a poor district, a tough district, and the superintendent who recently retired from there was $400,000. And when he retires, he's retired. He's gotten busted on corruption. So let's see what happens to his pension. I can't remember, but he'll get up $10 million in pensions over his retirement. And you're asking ordinary people to pay for that.
Yep. Ordinary people, keep that in mind, people. The ordinary people are paying that. So basically, the Chicago, we remember Al Capone in the mob days, you talk about the untouchables. These people are the untouchables. You virtually can't fire them. They make a mint of money. Their contracts are guaranteed. And they have the nerve to spin the narrative that they're underpaid and the teachers make less than everyone else. And finally, what happens when you can't pay it? What happens when... We'll talk about losing population, but when enough people leave that they're not feeding enough money into the bucket. So even if we argue that they deserve, to make $120,000 a year on a pension, how are you going to pay it when you don't have the money, right? So
yeah. And before I answer that, Charles, let me just say one thing. We're not, I don't want people to think I'm crazy because. So here's the other extreme, and here's why we got in such a big mess. We gave our unions too much power to negotiate. And they negotiate over everything. This is why, just the other day when all schools were removing masks and or going mask optional, Chicago, kept forcing masks. And that was because Chicago had agreed with the unions in a collective bargaining agreement that they would keep masking until whatever it was, July of 2020.
End of the school year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, end of school year. So, what the heck was that doing in the collective bargaining? So now let me tell you what happens in other states at the other extreme. If you go to Texas or if you go to Georgia, or if you go to, I don't know, I forget if it's North Carolina, South Carolina, school districts are not allowed to bargain with the unions. It's against the law. In other words, the taxpayers, the residents are first. In Illinois, we have it backwards. The unions have all these powers. And so, they don't give all those powers to unions in other states because they know what happens. So those unions get too powerful. They're negotiating with the government that they help elect. And then, you end up with this kind of corrupted problem we have where it just grows so much and then nobody wants to get out of it. So coming back to your question, how does this play out? Well, I don't know. We were almost junk rated before we got these $200 billion in funding from the federal government. No state's ever been rated junk. Chicago's got by far a bigger pension problem than Illinois. Chicago's already rated junk. CPS has been rated junk for a long time. And, how does it play out? Well, what has to happen? I mean, people at some point they're not dumb. And we talked about the Indiana property taxes. We talked about the opportunity in Texas. We talked about, how population in Texas grew by 4 million people last decade, 2.8 million in Florida. Those places are thriving. They're booming. Atlanta downtown, especially when you start talking about entrepreneurs and Blacks, there's a huge movement in Atlanta for Black-owned businesses. We lost 180,000 Blacks from the Chicago area in the 2000 to 2010 census period, and we lost another 85,000 last census. So, I don't know. Will people move out too fast for Chicago for it to be able to hold up itself and pay back all its debts? I don't know how it happens, but at some point, you've got these pension funds like the Chicago Police and Chicago Fire Funds. There's hardly any money in them left. And so to pay those pensions is going to have to come straight out of the budget, which means other stuff's going to get cut because there's just no savings for these retirements. And so it's going to have to come out of everybody's hide.
Coming up, more with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints, and in this segment we talk about equity. And it may seem a bit off topic, but it's important because it is all the rage and everyone's talking about it. And the president started his administration off by talking about how equity and race is going to be a key point to every part of his administration. So how we spend this money we get from the federal government and how we apply resources and opportunities throughout the state will play an important part to whether things get better or not. So we talk about how that has affected the way things have been done during and post-COVID. Well, you talked about getting all this money. I know we were in trouble there before, and now things, people can pretend that things are better because, look, we can do all this stuff, but really it's because the federal government gave you all this money. But there's another issue with that. There's been a big push. Everybody gives me a hard time when you take things to race, but how can you not when everybody else does? So there's this big push on equity going across the country. So now you got all this money that could be used to solve some of the problem, at least move in the right direction. But everything has to be done through an equity lens. So talk about how that has played in what's happening to the money and why we don't tend to find solutions to these problems because the focus is off.
Yeah, no, you're bringing a good point. And so now if I go back to your first question about how things are different with COVID, I would say that could be number one. Back in the good old days, we liked merit. We liked competence, right? That's how we improved things in life and in ourselves. That's how we made our governments better, our businesses better. We celebrated the people that could do something really well, that were conscientious and hardworking and succeeded. But since in this latest crop of people who manage our state and in our cities, in particular Chicago and Illinois, merit and competence has been taken over by equity, by inclusion, by diversity. And those are really hard things to measure and to understand. And when you start putting those terms into budgets, now I remember Lori Lightfoot's first budget, suddenly it wasn't about, spending the taxpayer dollar well and making sure that we grow like crazy so that everybody has more opportunities and we create more jobs and we thrive and our population, expands greatly. It was all about equity. And we're gonna hand out money and make decisions made based on equity. And same thing for Governor Pritzker. And it's like, well, what the hell does that all mean? And how do you measure it? And and is equity good if maybe our equity is going to come about because we all do worse? And that's really what's happening is we're getting to equity. The outcomes are starting to get more equal, but because we're all going down, not because we're all moving up.
Yep, I call it negative equality. Right? It's still equality, right? If you have three and I have none and I just take your three and now no one has none, we're equal. Right? Yeah. But who benefits from that? I think that this is going to be something that needs to be monitored long term because it's going to be a problem not because being fair to people isn't good, it's because no one's focused on solutions. So no one cares if it's positive, if it works. if it helps people. It's just like, look at me, look at what I did. And this is not the time to be in it after people suffered of all economic categories, races, and everything suffered after COVID and everything else, to just say, we're going to put this. Well, the president led with that, saying that that's going to be the goal of his administration, and other people follow. But I don't see, I don't hold out a lot of hope on it being successful for sure. But
well,
go ahead.
If I could jump in there, and this is what drives me banana. And if I had my way in Illinois, I bring up the word competition again. And again, that comes back to merit, right? Merit and competence is competition. Our legislators, our leaders don't think in competing terms, where our neighbors do. Indiana, I tell you what, Indiana, Wisconsin, they've made the reforms that are shunned here in Illinois. They've made labor reforms. They've made the school choice reforms. They've lowered taxes reforms. They're doing all this stuff, and they're kicking our butt. Wisconsin grew in the last decade by 200,000 people. Indiana grew by 300,000 people. They're cold weather Midwest states, and they're growing. Illinois was one of 3 states to shrink, right? It was us in the country, Illinois, West Virginia, and Mississippi. That's the group we're hanging out with. We're shrinking. And what's amazing is that those other states understand they're competing for people. They're competing for talent. And when you compete, you actually grow. And when you grow, you create jobs. And when you create jobs, you grow incomes. And for everybody, right? And you can love Trump or hate Trump, whatever. But one of the things that happened under Trump was that you had the lowest unemployment rate ever in history. And that included the lowest unemployment rate for blacks, Hispanics, women. I mean, isn't that and their wage growth was far higher than it was for whites. I mean, isn't that the ultimate way you compete and you grow and you make everybody more successful and have meaning because they have jobs and they earn more income? We don't think that way at all, ever. We think in these weird equity terms that chase people away. And that's why we shrink. That's why we balloon our debts. We don't do things because we're smart.
Coming up, more with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. And in the last segment, he ended by talking about how we have policies and decisions that chase people away, which is a great segue to this segment, because I brought up the one important issue that's not necessarily economic, and it is crime. So I wanted to talk to him about the crime in Chicago and what his thoughts on that problem may be.
Well, the good news is, as you know, and I think you recently interviewed him, is we just hired Matt Rosenberg at Wirepoints. We're excited to have him on. He spent a lot of time. He just wrote a book about what the hell happened to Chicago, during this COVID period. He's a native son, as he calls himself. And while he was away, he saw what was happening, the riots and the crime and all that. So we're happy to have him on board. But I can't help but say it's the same discussion. And of course, it's complex, right? It's complex. But I think it's the same thing we're just talking about, the whole equity discussion and, the defund the police, and, we're forgetting about merit again. When you move away from the standard metrics of merit and competence and success, and you move to these other things that are definitionally, they're really hard for people to know what they are, it makes a muck of the world. And our police don't know how to act anymore. People don't know how to act anymore. Our young kids are hearing all kinds of weird stuff. You got to tie it back to schools. You got to tie it back to, this critical race theory. All that has really confused everybody. And I've got young kids. I can see it. Everybody's confused. And so, geez, when you have that kind of confusion, people are smart. People are smart, and criminals can smell it. They have incentives. They may not be the incentives we like, but they have incentives, and they play on them. And we just put out a piece this morning that in 2022, here we are, mean, we're kind of post-COVID, right? Not really, but kind of post-COVID. At least we're back in school. Our places are open. We don't have vaccine mandates. We don't have vaccine passport mandates. And yet our crime this year so far is up 34% over a disastrous 2021. What the hell is that? Right? These thefts are up. These carjackings are up. I think the thefts are up 63% year on year. Car thefts and carjackings are up 34%. What the hell, right? I mean, so what do we point at? We've forgotten what policing is, and I've been spending some time learning about what New York did back in the 90s. But we're going to have to figure it out because our per capita murders here are out of control compared to what's happening in Los Angeles and New York.
But why? I mean, why are they making this move? I try to. It's hard these days, but I try to assume positive intent, and I can't believe that there are politicians. Most of the politicians, tend to be fairly successful business people, lawyers, whatever. So outside of being politicians, they weren't living in squalor. So they don't like crime. They don't want to be robbed. They don't want people to get shot. So why would a legislator say, this is really bad what's been going on? I think the solution is to let people out of jail. How can they, even when it comes to the public health and safety, still say that equity and race should be the greater focus? Wow, what do you think? I mean, try to get in their mind and think what they think. Assuming that it's not just because, not even if I want to win the election, because I don't see how you think that would win an election. So what are they thinking?
Okay, so some of it is that the truth hasn't come out yet. And that's something, with Matt coming on, and we put out our first crime data piece today. People need to know the facts. And I think that, Lori Lightfoot was out there saying crime is better a couple of days ago.
Wow.
Right now, okay, there are 4 fewer murders this year than last year. So instead of
last year was high.
Yeah, right. So there's 108 murders, and this year there's 104. Okay, 4. Okay, you're still on the same track. Shootings are down 12%, but overall crime rate is up 34%. Now, so she's out there saying it's better, and and if you don't have critical people saying no, that's not true, then people don't know the facts. They'll listen to it. They'll see that there's too much of the press that has been complicit. I think you're starting to see the press get better and better, at least on crime. But I think there's too many people that have a worldview that, this whole white supremacy, equity stuff has to be destroyed. And so they're not sure if it's good politics, but I think some of them sure like it. And here's the problem with the COVID period. And I think all this crime and equity and all that, until legislators and aldermen and mayors and whatever, until they're punished for their bad behavior, in other words, allowing crime to go up or overplaying their COVID mitigation powers or being absent, in the legislature, nobody ever tried to take power away from Pritzker for his powers. Until those legislators get punished by the public for not, taking care of things, they'll keep doing it. And so that's really the question, Charles. Are people more awake this time around? Are people aware that this crime, are they going to buy the stories that, it's because we're racist that is happening and they're going to keep voting for the same people? Or are they going to throw out people like Kim Foxx? I don't know. But they do have, and I think people like Kim Foxx have a different worldview, and they're sticking with it. Despite what the facts are telling us, despite what the data is telling us, despite the fact that, murders might be down compared to last year, but they're up 86%, so far this year compared to 2019 before COVID, they're up 86%. So don't give me this stuff that they're down a little bit. So, Charles, I think a lot of them are stuck in their mentality, and it's really hard to say, oops, I really screwed up. So it just might have to happen at the ballot box is the way we kind of tell everybody what makes more sense.
Coming up, my final segment with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I've reached my final segment with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. And in this segment, I ask him a simple question, which probably doesn't have a simple answer. So what do we do? How do we turn things around? How do we improve the climate for business, make it safer, and make opportunities for everyone in Illinois? And tell us a bit about what Wirepoints does.
I think fundamentally, and it's going to take new leadership to message differently. And I kind of equate it to Ronald Reagan. He changed how we view things. And I think we have to change how we view things in Illinois. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. I don't see that person out there right now. But, the first thing you got to do is we got to get back to the individual and merit. And that's why I talked a lot about that. As long as equity and all this stuff keeps being the center, then we forget about the beauty and the sanctity of the individual and how important letting each person know how great they can be and what an important part they can be because they're great individuals. And so we got to get that back in, and we got to get rid of all this, power of groups and, like Governor Pritzker's power to run the state like he did. No, we can't have that. So got to get the individual back in number one. Number two is we got to get back to pushing government decisions to their lowest level. Right now, we're centralizing too many things, which gives the government too much power. That's why nothing gets changed in Illinois. Every city is struggling because the pension problem, all controlled by the state legislature. The collective bargaining laws and the labor power that the unions have, the public sector unions, all controlled at the central level. Things like prevailing wages, there's all kinds of things. They're all mandated from the top. And so our cities can't do anything. They're stuck. They're handcuffed. So push as many decisions down. And that's, if I were to advise a governor, it's like, man, try to push it all down. Don't try to consolidate it, right? And again, Governor Pritzker's control, executive order power is the picture of the exact opposite of that. And then, another thing we have to do is deregulate like crazy. Again, hate Trump or love Trump. One of the things he did was deregulate like crazy. We can't compete with all those other states if we don't deregulate like crazy. And it should be really easy for people to start businesses, move here, hire people, put up your shingle. You shouldn't have to go through, like in Chicago, all your, you don't want to go through alderman every time you want to do something. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to be done. But, the number one and two things financially, Charles, that have to be done, you have to solve pensions, because if you don't solve pensions, you'll never have money for all the other things we need, and you'll never lower taxes. So you have to solve pensions. And then two, you got to take away a lot of the power of the public sector unions. You got to defang them. They're too powerful. Give power back to the people. And again, that comes back to the individual being the power, not the groups. So there's a lot that has to be done. Will it happen right now? I'm very skeptical. And what makes me fearful is that the only way to get there is just to have, sadly, more people leave. The finances will get worse. We'll have to go through some serious financial crisis. And then the question is, who picks up the pieces with which plans? And part of what Wirepoints does is we're trying to put out our pension solution, our collective bargaining solutions. How do we lower property taxes? We try to put all those out there so that when the proverbial what hits the fan, there's good ideas out there ready to be picked up, not bad ones. But unless something miraculous changes, it just seems like we're gonna have to go through a lot of pain first, and then hopefully, like everywhere, we pick up the pieces and we make this state the amazing state it should be, because this state is endowed with so many great qualities. Just remove the politics, remove a lot of the politicians. It's got the great assets with the lake, with the soil, with the infrastructure, with where it is, the universities. Come on, you would die to start a new state in a place like Illinois.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. He is Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. Ted, it's been great speaking with you, and thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charles. I appreciate it.